Hey guys, guess what? Tom Dundon's got a family so big it can fill up 2 whole lines on the Stanley Cup. Welcome everyone to the Caniac Report. My name is Andrew Miller. My usual co-host Sam Wallace is taking this episode off. He is in the middle of a move, so let's all send our thoughts and prayers to him as he deals with the daunting task of going through a move in the middle of July. He should be back for the next episode, so don't worry, you're only stuck with me just this one time. But before we get into it, we have a great partnership with SeatGeek. Use the code Caniac Report, all one word, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase of anything, be it a concert, comedy show, sporting event, even just an excuse to go inside a venue and give your own AC a break. You can scan the QR code right above my head to the right there, $20 off your first purchase at SeatGeek, Caniac Report. So let's get into it. Big news in the NHL right now is that the Anaheim Ducks have matched the offer sheet from the Philadelphia Flyers, making Leo Carlsson, coming off of his entry-level deal, the highest paid player in the NHL at $18 million a year. From my understanding, the contract is very front-loaded, heavy on the bonuses. So I think the moral of the story here has to be handle your business, otherwise some other team's going to do it. The way that teams were handling these offer sheets, where there was this kind of notion that by doing it, it wasn't the gentlemanly thing to do amongst GMs, or that if a player accepted the offer sheet that it would, create turmoil with his team if it was matched. I think that's all kind of gone out the window. I think our Canes have actually played a big part in this kind of change of attitude towards it, whether it was the Sebastian Aho offer sheet from Montreal, who Montreal showed you how not to do an offer sheet. You don't offer a guy a fair deal. It's not how this works. What you do is you overpay so that you put a team in a cap bind in a position where they have to make a hard choice. Now, keeping it with Carolina, I think we saw Montreal assuming that at that time, new owner Tom Dundon was going to be similar to the old guard and be a bit of a penny pincher, which reputation aside, and we will be getting into that he wasn't going to match a very fair deal for Aho. Of course he did. Aho had no intention on leaving Carolina, I don't think, but a deal was put out there that made sense to him. And if we can, skip a few weeks of just going back and forth, waiting for who's going to make the phone call next, why not do it? Dundon and Tulsky and Waddell and the Hurricanes then proceeded to do the offer sheet in what is proven to be the effective way in overpaying for a player like a Jesperi Kotkaniemi. Now, obviously, hindsight's 2020. We would all revisit that and do that different. I think Kotkaniemi is a guy where if he was on this team not at that cap hit, we're all talking differently about him, right? We all understand that, a guy is going to say yes to that kind of money, but it's just been a deal that has not worked out. And Sam and I have both given our opinions on Kotkaniemi, where we think he's a great guy. We think his presence in the locker room on this cup run was, frankly, very admirable, because he could have been sour grapes the entire time. But the guy's got to go. But so when we look at the situation with Leo Carlsson, Philadelphia sees that this coming into his own player who's likely going to be one of the top 2 or 3 centers in the league soon, if not already, quite frankly. I think Leo Carlsson's a little underrated playing out west. You got a guy like Celebrini right up the road in San Jose. So maybe flying a little under the radar to the casual NHL fan, but Leo Carlsson's going to be a cornerstone of this league for a long time. So with the way the cap's going, 18 mil, yes, it's going to affect how Anaheim has to go about their business. Everything we know about their GM, he was known as the little ball of hate when he was a player. We'll have to see how he actually handles this, if there is any truth to there being some animosity now between him and Carlsson. But I think it's just business. I think Philly saw the opportunity to put a team in a bind. And would you give up 4 first-round picks when you think you have a chance to make the playoffs every year to add a guy like that to your roster? Absolutely. I think any first-round pick, I think we sometimes overvalue that concept, right, of a first-round pick. A first-round pick could mean you're getting a top 3 pick, in which case, more often than not, they're at least going to be a serviceable NHL player. But once you get past round, that 15th, 16th pick, for every Seth Jarvis steal, there's just an infinite number of guys who barely crack the NHL. So I think if you're from Philly's standpoint, you get to throw a little bit of chaos towards Anaheim, which maybe not so much the teams themselves, but the front offices between Philly and Anaheim. That's turning into one of the little sneaky rivalries in the NHL right now between everything going on with Zegras, Cutter Gauthier going over there, and now this Leo Carlson debacle. I'm sure there's been some choice words behind closed doors between those two front offices, but I think the Ducks did what they had to do. But again, moral of the story, handle your business before someone else does. And to circle it back to the Canes, Tulsky looks smarter and smarter every day for locking up Jackson Blake and Logan Stankoven into those deals as early as he did, because who knows, right now maybe we're dealing with an offer sheeter like that. And I think you can make the argument that, granted, it's life-changing money that both Jackson Blake and Logan Stankoven have gotten, but after their performance in the playoffs, being 2/3 of the best line in hockey for 2 months, there's probably a couple more mil on those deals. So moving on, obviously less waves about this one, but Utah has matched the offer sheet from New Jersey on Brandon Hayton, just under $5 million. I think he's a good player, but this does walk him to unrestricted free agency. So they keep the player. We'll see what Utah does. Obviously, they had to move Peterka, who they were hoping would be a big piece of them getting established. But I think there's a lot of really positive things going on in Utah, even if you only keep the guy around just as a, basically an own rental for 1 year. You show that you're not going to be pushed around. And both sides have come out and said, hey, it's just business. And with the free agency market being as kind of light this year as it's been, I think it's another avenue that teams have to try to improve themselves. And I like that we're seeing this new kind of outside the box thinking way of going about things. Obviously there's been offer sheets before, right? But they were very few and far in between. And it's only been recently, like we saw it between the Blues and the Oilers with two players from there, because they saw that Edmonton was in a cap bind and we're going to force you to make a hard choice. So obviously we have basically a rocket scientist as our GM. So I think sometimes we almost take for granted guys doing things the smart way, but the NHL and hockey in general has just kind of been plagued by this revolving door of guys who do it the same way every time. There's an old boys club kind of thing going on there, right? So we're seeing this new blood come into the front offices and to the coaching staffs, quite frankly, where you have guys who aren't just all-time hockey guys. You have guys like Tulskis who are more analytic driven. You have players coming up like the Rod Brindamores in the coaching who, granted, still hard-nosed, hard-working guys, but they're just the way they go about things. You can tell it's different. And I think we're starting to see that throughout the league, down to how GMs are going about their business, to players advocating for themselves more, which, there's been, some examples of that I think are valid. There's other ones where guys, force their way out of teams, even though they've, fought for no trade protection in their contracts. But I'm sure we'll be circling back to that whenever the next collective bargaining agreements come through. Also in NHL's news, Daniel Alfredsson has joined the coaching staff of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, for those of you who might not know, Daniel Alfredsson, longtime Ottawa Senator, great, actually, maybe their best player ever, Hall of Famer, a guy, quite frankly, this is not any slight to him. I think he absolutely deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. He's the guy I've always used as if he's in, then how come Brendan Moore is not in? But it's a different topic for a different podcast. But that's got to be an interesting dynamic, right? You're a star player for the rival team, and now you're on the coaching staff of your heated rivals in the same province. I'll be really curious to see what kind of reception he gets the first time the Leafs come into Ottawa. I think we all understand that, this is pro sports. Loyalty is great. Some guys really fall in love with the city. I'm sure Alfredsson did with Ottawa the same way guys like Rod Brindamore and Cam Ward have with Raleigh. But if there's no room for career advancement, eventually you got to make a move, right? And push comes to shove. These are just all franchises of one big company, right? So best of luck to Alfredsson. I think the Leafs are going to be an interesting team to watch this year. Obviously, they're always in just the center of everything drama-wise in the league, but they should be an interesting watch. A lot of top-end talent, and I think Alfredsson is a guy who obviously he has a great mind for hockey. Let's see what he can do as he continues to his growth as a coach. We saw Maverick Bourque extend in Nashville, 6 years, $5.5 million deal. Definitely a bit of a betting on the future with him, though I think it's a pretty calculated bet, having said that. And as Canes fans, obviously we're happy to kind of, I don't think a lot of us have super hard feelings either way towards Dallas, but obviously they're associated with the Rantanen thing. So having them lose Maverick Bourque after watching what Logan Stankoven has done, that's an aging team now that's watching two young centers with super bright futures. Stankoven, I think, has a brighter future than even his biggest fanboy this time last year would have thought. So Dallas fans, if you're watching this, let me know how you're feeling about that, watching your possible future number 1 and 2 centers walk away with nothing. Obviously, you got Rantanen, but Carolina obviously took the Rantanen trade and has turned it into Keandre Miller, Logan Stankoven, and there's another first-round pick there. And we'll see what Maverick Bourque does and what's obviously going to be a expanded role in Nashville. Arbitration deals have started to come through. For those who might not be aware, when there's two teams, they come to a crossroads and there's some type of restricted free agency status. What you can basically do is file for arbitration, which means that a third party gets involved and basically both sides have to sit down and discuss what a player's worth is. There's all kinds of horror stories you hear from former players about how basically the team has to come in and explain why you're not worth this much, and you have to come in and do the opposite. And sometimes, obviously, things get a little heated, but some pretty notable names are on this list. You got Kirby Dach, Drysdale, Connor McMichael in St. Louis. He just went there as part of the Jordan Kyrou trade, so it'll be interesting to see how that gets worked out. Cole Perfetti, Trevor Zegras in Philadelphia will be interesting. I'm sure he's going to want to secure the bag. Was a household name when he was with the Ducks, but I think mostly because of, he was doing, the lacrosse style goals, the over the net passes. He came to Philly and actually proved he can play with a little bit of an edge. I thought he was actually pretty impressive in that series that the Canes played against them. Obviously, Carolina was just way more advanced and ahead of schedule than Philly was, but Philly's got a lot of good stuff working in their future. And even though they didn't walk away from the Zegras deal or from the Leo Carlson deal. Sorry, just my brain just went numb for a second there. The Leo Carlson deal, you have to like that your management group is at least taking risks. They're not just saying, oh, hey, we made it to the second round and got pumped by Carolina. What a feel-good story. They're actively trying to build on it. And the big one, obviously, is Jason Robertson with Dallas. We've heard of a few possible trades that could have worked out. Obviously, he said no to $15 million with the Seattle Kraken. That's still got to sting if you're Seattle. They're a team that came out their first year, made a lot of good big waves, good moves, and since then have just been kind of in the wilderness of the league, or if not for being one of the new teams with, frankly, some of the cooler jerseys in all of sports. Obviously, Bowie, the mascot's a fan favorite, but aside from that, they just are stuck in this irrelevancy kind of purgatory. And I think all of us Canes fans can't help but look at Ronnie Francis being a part of that, and just maybe not point and laugh, but a little smirk at our old friend Ron Francis. But it'll be interesting to see how that gets worked out. Obviously, he's one of the best goal scorers in the league, so he's going to command a pretty penny to stick around. I think a sign and trade is off the table there, but you never know. Someone comes around and offers a good deal that they actually like. Just because you've reached this point in the negotiation doesn't mean that can't happen. But I'm guessing Robertson's going to be part of Dallas's future for a long period of time. It's just a matter of doing the nasty business of money. So that covers it for NHL news. Now let's get to some Hurricanes news. And obviously we have to talk about it. You've seen the memes. You've heard the jokes. Tom Dundon, owner of the Carolina Hurricanes. When we saw all of the names of the players, the coaching staff, everybody come out engraved in the Stanley Cup, etched in silver forever, you couldn't help but notice the top two lines, all Dundon, Tom Dundon, Mrs. Dundon, every Dundon down to the dog. I have a few thoughts on that. I don't think this makes Tom a bad person for doing this. I think it's a little corny in my opinion. You have a kindergartner's name on the cup. And considering guys like Joel Nystrom, who technically didn't play enough regular season games, but you can always file for a exception to the rule. And I think Joel Nystrom absolutely deserves his piece of being part of this team's history, because let's not forget, with that revolving door of injuries to start this season, if Joel Nystrom and Charles Alexis Legault, quite frankly, don't step up and play the way they do, this season could have been derailed. And who knows, maybe you're not getting that first overall seed in the East. Maybe you're not as well rested going into those later series. So Joel Nystrom, I think, got left off when, sure, it's technically not enough regular season games played, but again, you can file for an exception to that. And then also longtime equipment guy Bob Gorman doesn't make the cut. So I think when you see a owner like Tom Dundon, who, fair or not, I think some of it is fair, some of it is a little bit of he kind of goes against the grain, so they're going to try to spin it a certain way. But he's developed this reputation for being just kind of hard to work with. If you've been following his purchase of the Portland Trail Blazers, which obviously that's a whole different ecosystem of how people expect to be paid, how much money is involved, quite frankly, the NBA compared to the NHL. But he's been given the nickname El Cheapo for how he handles things behind closed doors. I don't have a problem. Obviously, you own the team. You're footing the bill. Your name should be on the cup. I don't have a problem with, because a lot of times businesses like this, it is a family affair. The wife gets on the cup. Maybe you have a couple of kids who were super involved in the locker room, were big parts of the team culture. I'm not in the room with these guys. I don't know. But there's a level of nepotism here that's just a little, it's a little corny, a little cringy to me, in that I think maybe from Tom's perspective, he sees it as a tribute to his children, which obviously we can all respect that. We all, it's a good loving parent move in theory, but I think it's something that as those kids get older, you're not going to want to be like, oh yeah, my name's on the Stanley Cup because my daddy insisted when I was in kindergarten that would be on there. It's not, it doesn't really ring well. At least that's how I would see it if I was them. But I think there's other instances on the Stanley Cup of people being on there. There's actually one instance where someone's name is actually X'd out. I'm a little surprised the powers that be let this slide. Again, I don't think it's as big of a scandal as a lot of people are making it out to be. Obviously, we're in the off-season protocols. You take whatever news story you can get and run with it. But if I was Tom Dundon, I don't know if I would have gone about it that way. Just my opinion. So that covers it up for news. Wanted to do something a little bit different today, a little fun. We're going to dive into the debate around jersey retirements, the NHL Hall of Fame, and the Canes Hall of Fame. Now, I know it's called the Canes Hall of Fame, but just to make it a little bit easier so we don't get confused as to what I'm saying, because I'm sure y'all know me, I can go on a tangent, and I'm sure this one's going to set that off a little bit. We're going to call it jersey retirement. Obviously means your number's going up into the rafters with guys like Brendan Moore, Wesley, all of them. We're going to call it the Hall of Fame, meaning the Hockey Hall of Fame, where Rod Brind'Amour should have been already. And we're going to not call it the Canes Hall of Fame. I'm going to call it the Ring of Honor, because that's what other teams call it, just to kind of, so that if you end up skipping ahead, you know what I'm trying to say. So let's start with Hall of Fame. Who are players on this team that I think will eventually see their names enshrined in Toronto in the Hockey Hall of Fame? I think you got to look at Jordan Staal. I think if he's not playing for this team, I think he's a multiple-time Selke winner. I think the Staal name does carry some weight here. You can't tell the history of hockey without talking about the Staals. Eric deserves to be in there. I think Jordan, with what he's done with this team, deserves to be in there. Mark, I think, deserves some type of recognition from the Rangers. He was a great player, and then the worst player that family produced was good enough to become a pretty high-level coach. You can't talk about the history of hockey and not talk about the Stalls. And you can't talk about the history of an entire franchise without talking about the Stalls. And Jordan, for how he came into the league, part of those great Penguins teams, comes to Carolina. He's supposed to have this, great being united with his brother. It doesn't work out. I think he has really embodied what people love in hockey players. He could have complained. He could have wanted out. He's stuck it out through some really tough years in Carolina and has been maybe the most important part in the turnaround, right behind, Rod Brindamore becoming coach. And even though we were, kind of critiquing him a minute ago, Dundon wanting to make this a cap team for all the talks about him being cheap, he is willing to spend on the players. So I think Jordan Staal deserves his place in the Hall of Fame. I have Jacob Slavin down here as well. Obviously, still a lot of hockey to be played, but first American to win a gold medal and a Stanley Cup in the same year since 1980. One of the premier shutdown defensemen. Pretty sure he's a multiple-time Lady Byng Award winner, which, some people like to scoff at that. I think sometimes it's a feel-good trophy. You give a nice story. I think with Jacob Slavin, number one defenseman, always going against the other team's best players, and is consistently in single digits in penalty minutes. And that's greatest of all time conversation stat-wise there. It doesn't pop off the page like goals or hits or anything like that. Just being a shutdown defenseman, no one can get it past you, and you're doing this without putting your team shorthanded hardly ever. I think Jacob Slavin will eventually have his name in Toronto. And obviously there are some other guys who I think we can circle back in a few years to see where they're at. The Ahos, the Jarvises, the Spetches. We're going to get into them in a second. The only person I have down with a big question mark next to it, he's actually a question mark for the next category as well. Frederik Andersen. I think undeniably greatest Danish goalie of all time. Cup winner with Carolina, obviously was a great goalie for the Leafs for a long period of time, even though there's some trauma there that both he and Leafs Nation share, both together and towards each other. But I think Freddie Andersen will be an interesting conversation once he decides to stop playing, about whether he gets the highest honor in being in the Hockey Hall of Fame. And we'll stick with Freddie when we go on to the next topic. Jersey retirements, players who will eventually have their names hanging in the Lenovo rafters to forever be pointed out by future generations of Hurricanes fans. Freddie Andersen, I think, has earned it. I think if Cam Ward is up there, I think Freddie Andersen needs to be up there. And that's not a slight on Cam. I think Cam Ward is an interesting case study of just imagine what his career would have looked like if they put more than two decent teams around him in his entire career. What would happen if they ever actually got him a halfway decent backup so that he wasn't being played into the ground? Granted, this is back when teams weren't using the rotation platoon style goaltending that we're seeing more and more now. You were expected to still play 60, 65 games a season. But I think Freddie, he comes to Carolina after we had guys like Mrazek, Reimer, McElhinney, all very good goalies in their own right. Freddie has had the longest sustained stretch of really good play, and this season, definitely his worst regular season, is the one where he puts it all together in the playoffs and really exercises those demons that kind of followed him since Toronto, of being known as this guy who, great regular season goalie, maybe balls out for a series or two and then just falls apart. And I think Freddie Andersen has gone, so too have the Hurricanes. Granted, I've said this numerous times, I think some of those exits in past playoffs, I think Freddie has taken a bit of the heat where he shouldn't have. A goalie sort of like a quarterback in football. Even if it's not his fault the team lost, it's always going to circle back to them some way. And I think Freddie Andersen has been on the receiving end of that. Now, obviously, people are going to mention the series against the Rangers, in particular that Game 6. And yes, even after winning the Cup, that is still going to be something that I just have nightmares about. I come from a family full of Rangers fans, so that one was extra spicy for me. But I think Freddie deserves to have 31 in the Raptors, and if not, he's a no-brainer to be in the Ring of Honor. Jordan Stahl, obviously, if I think he's going to be in the Hall of Fame, put him right next to his brother. I don't care if it's out of order. I think 11 and 12 go together. I think right behind Brendan Moore. I think when we're talking about Hurricanes hockey, you're talking about the Stahl brothers. Sebastian Aho, has he done enough that we can already pencil him in there? I think so. It was a bit of a down year statistically, but defensively, he's one of the best forwards in the game. Again, sort of like with Jordan Stahl, I think he's a guy where if he's playing in a bigger market, if he hasn't won a Selke already, he's got at least a couple of finalists runs in him at this point, I think. And I think you can say that about Seth Jarvis as well, who I also have penciled in here with the question mark. Obviously, Jarvis needs to do it for a little bit longer. You never know what's going to happen, right? Like, he doesn't cross me as a guy who's going to get traded. I think they very much see him as a long-term Hurricane, both for what he does on the ice and also talk about a guy just absolutely winning over a fan base. From what I can tell, looking at it from up here in Massachusetts, is he seems like most kids, Seth Jarvis is their favorite player. And I don't blame him. Just seems like a really fun guy on and off the ice. I have a lot of respect for Seth Jarvis and his talks about mental health. That's something I think that especially us guys need to be better about. Obviously, we talked about it with the tragic incident involving Claude Lemieux. So I think more guys like Seth Jarvis talking about mental health is huge. And obviously, that's not why you give a guy any type of honors in hockey. But I'm always going to mention that when I talk about the greatness of Seth Jarvis, because especially such a happy-go-lucky type of guy like that to talk about that. That's huge. And that kind of, behavior, when you act like that, that has a rippling effect in your community. So, and that actually does, I think, need to be considered when we talk about retiring a guy's number. Brendan Moore could run for mayor of Raleigh and probably win. You have to add that to the impact and why you retire a guy's jersey. And I think Jarvis, assuming he stays long-term his whole career here, he'll end up there. Slavin, no-brainer. Don't even need to explain that. 74 will be in the rafters. You can preemptively put him up there as far as I'm concerned. I think he might be the best Hurricane ever. Like, no joke. It doesn't have this, obviously centers, goalies, they're going to get a lot of the fanfare. Is there anybody who's ever played for this team who has been at the top of his position for as long as Jacob Slavin has? I don't think so. I don't think at any point you would ever say that Rod Brindamore was the best center in the NHL. Same with Cam Ward as a goalie. Eric Stahl, even during that 100-point season, you wouldn't have said he was the best at his position. I think Jacob Slavin, when you factor in just pure shutdown D-man, who's better than him? If I was building a team from scratch, would I take a guy like a Cale Makaro over Jacob Slavin? Sure, of course. But if it's just one play, there's Connor McDavid on a breakaway, and you can only have one guy between him and the goalie. Who do you want? It's Jacob Slavin, and that's been the answer for the better part of a decade now. So, Hall of Fame, jersey retirement, Slavin, no-brainer. Last guy I have down is Svechnikov, Andre. If his career were to end today, I think he's a Ring of Honor player. I think he has been a very good Hurricane, one of my favorite players. I think even when he's going through his offensive droughts that he can go through, whenever his head's in the game and he's not trying too hard, which I do think Andre falls into that sometimes. He is looking to make things happen instead of just letting the game come to him. Even when he's not scoring, when he's letting the game come to him, the difference he makes in retrieving pucks, being a power forward, he's got a bit of that pest side to him. I think if Andre can put together a couple more regular seasons like the one he did last year and another playoff run like he did last year, peppered in with a few, big moments like we saw in these playoffs, which actually you can say that about Jarvis, Aho, and Svech. I think defensively they were great in this past playoff run, but offensively left something to be desired. But when they showed up, boy, did they show up, and in the biggest moments. So Andre, right now you're kind of on that cusp of, I don't think you've done enough to be seriously talked about as a jersey retirement guy, but shoo-in for Kane's Ring of Honor. So now let's get into the Ring of Honor. And I'm going to try to make this mostly guys who are on the team, but there's a couple I have on here that were here recently that I think are worth discussing. I'm probably missing a few. Maybe that'll be something that I post on Twitter to see if you guys have any suggestions. But Canes Ring of Honor, or as they call it, the Canes Hall of Fame. These are guys who, maybe don't warrant no one's ever going to wear 17 ever again, but warrant a place in, when you look up at those guys, it's that 1A, 1B type of honor. Whereas maybe not a Hall of Fame player, but a player that if we're going to look up at the Raptors and get a quick screenshot of the history of this team, guys, you cannot tell the history of Canes hockey without these players. And the first answer, I think, is obvious. Jordan Martinook. Jordan Martinook is one of the most important players to ever put on a Hurricanes jersey. Not always, an offensive producer. He was even put on waivers a couple of times. He's been a healthy scratch a few times. But when we talk about this team coming out of the dark ages, that decade-long playoff drought, Jordan Martinook coming to this team as a fairly no-name guy and just being such a part of the culture shift, both in terms of what we see on the ice, but also just, the players, really kind of falling in love with the city, him going to Wolfpack games, him, pretty famously every time a Nickelback shows up in Raleigh, it's a big old Canadian fest up there with Marty Party. I think Jordan Martinook has to get some type of permanent recognition from this team. I really do. I think it's very fitting that even though, yes, Bussy coming in game, was it game 3 or 4? It's been, well, time flies when you're having fun, but Bussy coming into the finals was obviously the big story. I still think that first line Jordan Martinook, something that a lot of fans just kind of roll their eyes at, because we've seen Rod go to this before when he needs things to get kind of settled down. First line Jordan Martinook was a big finishing blow on Vegas. And I think that that's just poetry. It's poetic justice. If Freddie's not getting his number retired, he's Canes Hall. He's a Ring of Honor player. Has to be. I think that covers it for all the guys who are currently on the team. Let me throw a few at you, though, who have since moved on, who are still playing, who I think deserve their spot and, quite frankly, deserve a lot of maybe not credit for the cut, but credit for the building process of getting them there, right? Number one, Brett Pesce. I think Brett Pesce not being here for this to all see itself to a cup is kind of cruel in a way. I remember last year's playoffs when they beat the Devils, who Pesce was a part of that, who Pesce is still a part of. You can tell in that handshake line just how much he meant to these guys, how much he meant to Rod, how much he loved his time in Carolina. It is what it is. These guys only have, if they're lucky, 15 years to make their money, and he had a chance to go make money elsewhere on a team that, at the time looked like they were on the up and up. Now, I think New Jersey, it'll be interesting to see what they do from here. But I think Brett Pesce, no matter what happens, he's forever a Hurricane. And again, I've said it 1,000 times in this episode already. Can't tell the story of the Hurricanes without talking about Brett Pesce. I think number 2 with the bullet, though, from that era has to be Teuvo Teravainen, Turbo, the two cherubs. He and Aho shared a brain at times. Again, one of those instances of there's more money to be made elsewhere. I'm willing to bet that in hindsight, maybe Turbo wishes that he left a little bit of money on the table to stay. With all the cap space Carolina has, say, come trade deadline, if Chicago's still in the dumps, I wouldn't be against bringing Teuvo back. I don't care if he's a high-end fourth line guy. I'll always be a Teravainen fan. I think at times it seemed like maybe he and Rod, not butted heads, but from my understanding from the Adam Golds of the world, people who are actually able to go to practice and all that kind of stuff, real reporters, dare I say, that he was a guy who, didn't take the conditioning side of the game, or at least practice anyway, as seriously as the other guys did. A little bit of pick and choose when you want to take it seriously. I get that. I was that kind of athlete too. I'm guessing that probably drove Rod crazy at times though. So, but I think Tabo's a guy who I think should be invited to a lot of the cup parties with the team, especially from Aho and Kokaniemi and Jarvis too, from who, you know, everything I've heard is basically a honorary citizen of Finland at this point with his relationship with them. I got Justin Falk on here. I think he was a great player, kind of wasted on the worst era of Hurricanes hockey, but I'm happy he got to at least experience that 2019 run. A memory of him that still really stands out to me is that goal against the Islanders where he's coming out of the penalty box and he gets that football style pass over the shoulder, corrals it, puts it on a stick, and scores a breakaway goal. Goes to St. Louis afterwards, and it just never really worked out after that. I mean, he's still in the NHL, still a good player, but I don't think he ever, at least as far as St. Louis is concerned, he never turned into what I think they were hoping for Justin Falk to be. And the last player I have on here, obviously I have some biases. If you're new to this podcast, if this is your first episode, you're missing out on Sam, and I am so sorry, because Sam is he is the brains, the looks, everything of this podcast. You are stuck with me, and if you've stuck with me now for 37 minutes, thank you so much. Bless your hearts. But Peter Mrazek, a guy I have a cat named after. That's how much I'm a big Mrazek fan. Obviously a guy that after he left Carolina, I think kind of still was an NHL goalie, but very much a backup, turned into a pumpkin a little bit. When he was on, he was unbeatable. And I think he comes from that Dominic Hasek school of thought that is one of the reasons that we all really love Pyotr Kochekov, or Pokechekov, as some of us call him. Just very aggressive, super fun to watch. And I think when he came to Carolina, he understood the assignment, and you could tell when he had that famous bench interview after they locked up the playoffs for the first time in decades that we're in, yes. And that really, I think, encapsulated how all of us felt that day, especially if you're a longtime Canes fan like me. So I'm almost 36, so I remember this team coming to Raleigh. It was a big deal to me because, you know, I had both my parents are from New York. I know, first person in Raleigh to ever say that. But when the Canes came to Carolina, it felt like, okay, this is my version of this. This is my legacy, my tradition, to go with a former Canes slogan. And Mrazek, very much seeming like he understood that, to me, is worth honoring in some way. And for a good stretch there, he was a very good goalie for Carolina. So not in the same level as Freddie, I don't think, but if there's a guy who I think is in that debate for the fourth seat in the Mount Rushmore of Hurricanes goalies, I think Mrazek has to be part of the conversation. But let me know what you guys think. Thank you again for hanging out with me today, listening to me ramble about all this. Again, Sam should be back. Hopefully his move is going well. Obviously, we're all kind of shuddering at our own memories of moving. So best of luck to him with that. And yeah, thank you again. And we will see you guys next time.